Okay, my name is Lenny Joey. I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Southern Indiana, past president of NSECA, uh, former partner with Bruce of Expressions of Culture, which produced the International Art Expo SOFA. Uh, and on the side, I'm an artist as well. Part of what we're going to do in the beginning is going to be pretty short. I'm going to give you a fairly brief program description of what we're going to try to do here. I introduce each of the panelists. We're going to have a discussion rather than a whatever a traditional panel is. I don't even know what that is. That will deal, we hope, with not only the alternative type spaces that we all have created, but hopefully provide you with information that you can leave here with, not only how to get into and take advantage of us, but to take home that information and maybe create a space or spaces in your own communities. I don't know where the slides are. Oh, they're over there. That's why I can't see them. Yeah, I see that now. I don't think I need to read this for you, because I always hate that about panels and lectures where you go in and they put something on the screen and you can read it yourself. Nonetheless, the panelists that we have here today are Bruce Robbins, who is the founder and CEO and president and chief guru of Lil Street Education Center, formerly Lil Street Studios, formerly Robbins Clay Company. We have Jeffrey, is it Dorsey? Dorsey, who is the executive director of Pittsburgh's own Union Project, which, if you're familiar with it, you know is an extensive program within the community for developing not only the arts but other social activist programming. We have Link Henderson, who created her own business in Lexington, Kentucky, initially as a studio and a place to supply some materials, and I guess she decided she should make more trouble for herself, so she started mixing her own clays for people, and then made more trouble for herself and expanded to Louisville, Kentucky. She also provides residences as well as internships for students and individuals who are just getting out of school that need a place to grow and mature a little bit more and learn the business side of things. Because one of the things that most educational institutions, including my own to a large degree, skip is on teaching you that the world of art is actually a business. Right now, according to the last study by the American for the Arts, there's 1.2 million people in America making a living off the arts. Roughly 40,000 of those people are in the fine arts, and another 15,000 of them are degreed individuals. Interestingly enough, there are more people who have non-degrees making a living in the arts than people with degrees. I mention that because when you have to argue with your state for funding, and invariably the legislatures will argue back that, well, the arts don't add any value to the community other than this abstract cultural thing. And the reality is we add an enormous financial benefit to every community we go into. I believe I read an article once in Forbes that said if the arts were a single business, it'd be one of the top 20 businesses in the country. So we come to it from the business perspective, the artist perspective, the perspective of the social activist, and the perspective of an old man, meaning me, who grew up being taught that service is something you just do, and you don't stop service once you retire. As I said, I retired from my university, and a few years ago created the New Harmony Clay Project, which is a artist in residence program from September through May, where we provide people who have a degree, doesn't matter whether it's BA, BFA, MFA. They could be fresh out of college, or they could have 40 years of experience. We try to do a blend, and I'm specifically in my program gearing that toward the younger people, because I was there once, and I was working in a kitchen or a living room, as I mentioned in the program. And once you can't work in a living room anymore, you got to find some place to work. And the best way to do that is to create your own. Uh, Next slide is my job. I'm going to let the individuals introduce themselves. We'll start with Link Henderson, and if you want to copy down her address or you get a card from her afterwards, you can. Link. Oh, is her microphone on?
Hello.
You want to speak to the slide as I go through?
Oh, sure.
Because that's all yours.
Oh, okay. That's a picture of, is the building up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a picture of, excuse me, our Louisville location. And then that's, it's in downtown Louisville. And that's where we manufacture our clay. And we have some classes. That's our Lexington location. That's been there for 16 years. We have a lot of students there. And it's mostly students in a store. And then that's me giving a tour to a school in Louisville of our clay mixing machine and how they're sort of watching the process. And that is a picture of our classroom. It's one of our kids' camps in the summer that we offer in Lexington. And then that's just a shot of part of our warehouse and our clay machine. Some of our materials. That is, oh, it's not clean. Oh my God. That's a side shot of our little gallery in Louisville. We have a small gallery, and that's available to the residents at the end of their residency. Part of their residency is that it needs to culminate in a gallery show, and that is a side shot of actually our first gallery show. And that is just a picture of our gas kiln in the warehouse in Louisville and some student work in the front.
We've only included a small selection of slides from each place because we didn't want to bore you with pictures of buildings. Next up is Bruce Robbins, Lil Street Learning Center.
It's actually Lil Street Arts Center.
So. Oh, I went through your webpage and got that.
Okay.
It's the Lil Street Arts Center.
Well, Lil Street Learning Centers are not-for-profit arm, so, okay. It was. There's the Photoshop version of the outside of our building. The sky in Chicago never looks like that. It's beautiful, ever. So it's a 40,000 square foot building on the north side of Chicago. And when people ask me how to get there, I always say you can walk to Wrigley Field from there, and people know how to get there. That's one of our classrooms, teacher, and a kid's classroom. And that's our metalsmithing classroom. So we have 25 classrooms in the building. 7 of them are ceramics. We have 4 metalsmithing classrooms, 2 textile, printmaking. We have a digital department. We have kids classrooms, something else, and printmaking. That's a picture of our gallery.
Jeffrey?
Great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Pittsburgh, to those of you who are not from here. Has anyone in the room been to Union Project? Just curious? Show of hands. Okay, great. Well, hopefully you can stop by before NSEEC is over. Tell you a little bit about it here with the first slide. So Union Project was built in 2000 we're in a church that was built in 1904. I should actually say that. And that's a picture of us taking it over in 2002. This is when we purchased it. It's about 15,000 square feet. It had been falling into disrepair and ruins when our co-founders came upon it. One of our co-founders is Justin Rothshank. Some of you may know him. He's here and showing at Union Project as well today. Basically, it was founded by Justin and other Mennonites who were studying in a service program with nonprofits here in Pittsburgh, to really be a space that could be healed physically, spiritually, by bringing different diverse communities that lived around the building. So kind of drawing on their Mennonite background, they envisioned an urban barn raising and garnered hundreds of volunteers to start helping clean, fix up, paint, repair the stained glass windows. It was a massive, massive project that to date has garnered about 50,000 hours of volunteer time. And that's really the root of what Union Project's about. It's an arts and community space, but I just wanted to make sure that you had a sense our nonprofit really has its roots in the community physical space. And then what you see here are kind of the current programs. We're going to be talking about our audiences and the different audiences we serve. We continue to restore it and fix it up, try to improve the space. One of the ways we earn revenue is through space rental and bringing diverse communities together to rent the space. These are pictures of our artist studio. We work with ceramics artists in particular and serve them through professional development programs. We give them opportunities to exhibit and sell their work. We provide studio spaces affordably for artists. We have on-site electric kilns. We're renovating for a new gas kiln location here. You see some drawings for a project we're fundraising for now. And then we also have a wood kiln off-site that we take classes out to. And then in addition to our art side of things, we run community programs that are really focused on social change. So we partner with dozens of individuals, grassroots groups, other nonprofits that are really focused on all kinds of specific areas around social change, you know, feeding the hunger, racial justice, environmental justice, that type of thing. And we try to bring the arts piece to that. And these last few slides are both a combination of the programs we run. We run over 70 ceramics programs, classes, workshops, custom programs on-site, and over 50 off-site. And this is an example of one of our outreach programs called 1,000 Birds, which I'm probably going to talk to a little bit later. So.
Okay, I'll speak to the New Harmony Clay Project. As you can tell by listening to these people, they are much more established. I mean, I think Link said 16 years, and you had said the other day 2002, and Bruce was about 1850. He's been there forever. I mean, he's a Chicago institution.
My friend.
Whereas the New Harmony Clay Project is only about 2.5 years old. Long story short, this is New Harmony is the site of two of America's most historic communal society attempts. The Rappites, that didn't work out, a religious group, and then the Owenites, which was based on very much the same themes that Jeffrey was talking about: social justice, education, learning. In fact, the reason you have kindergarten in America is because it was founded and created in New Harmony, among other things they did. One of the first libraries. And its patron saint was a descendant of the Owens, who happened to also be an owner of Texaco and Standard Oil, which allowed her to fund an awful lot of the arts in the community. This building is Richard Meyer designed this and the Athenaeum. The original building they had to tear down because he didn't account for termites, and one of the walls was sort of falling over. Which I guess I had to press that slide. This is the studio. Our space is fairly small. The most what we have in there is 3 resident artists at any one time. I was asked if I would take over the project after I submitted to them some ideas for them to do, not me. And I agreed under certain conditions, which I laughingly told these fellows, I don't have a board of directors and I don't want one. I fund 1/3 of the program myself, so I don't really need to worry about accounting. And I wanted to have authority and control over the kind of artists that we brought in. And by that I mean we will not accept an artist who is going to be in direct competition to an artist in our community trying to make a living as a potter or as a jeweler or whatever. It's, in my opinion, it's unfair to subsidize someone to compete with someone. You know, if they can come in and do experimental stuff and fail, that's fine. We're open to BA, like I mentioned before, BA, MA, doesn't matter. Prefer to have some education because we're not there to teach you. We're really not even there to mentor you, although it happens. Well, we're there to just offer you a facility and to help facilitate your growth as an artist and experimenting. There is no obligation for you to produce any work per se for show, although we do have a show at the end. You could work the entire period of your residency and have absolutely zero to show for it, but a lot of learning took place. We offer you basically the studio space, which is in a nice little location on the Wabash River where you can watch those weird carp that jump up and hit you in the head. That, just some interior shots of the building. That's a messy. We also do something that we stole from Link called Date Night, where we offer an evening for couples, partners, doesn't matter. And for a small fee, you come and work for the evening, learn how to throw, which is what a lot of people like to, engineers and doctors, they all wanted to do that, but they don't want to be artists. But it's a way of bringing your community to you, and it's been very successful for us. So thanks, Link. It's one of our first resident artists. This is where the artists live. It's one of the oldest buildings in this community. It's about from the 1840s. Very comfortable space. During the summers, we offer workshops, like assault. This particular one was assault workshop. We do things for teachers. We do raku. So during the summer, and children's programming. During the summer months, we're a little more active, direct community. Fall and spring, we're dedicated solely to the artists. And that's just, a typical kiln shot, which you have to throw in. And last but not least is Henry. This cat showed up one day, friendly as could be. Nobody knows who it was or where it came from, and obviously made itself very much at home.
Does the cat have a degree?
It does. It's got a pedigree.
Oh, good, Lenny.
That was pretty fast, I thought. I thought that was pretty quick, actually, for a whole what I did with setting this discussion up, and it is a discussion, which feel free to interject and ask a question. If we're on a topic that you need a little more information, raise your hand. We'll answer your question. If we don't know the answer, as I said at the bottom, I think of this or another sheet, we'll just make an answer up. So you'll get something, and it'll be a good answer. And these are some of the questions that we needed to think through. Is like, what was how did this program get started? We can tell you how we got our starts. That might help you get a start later on. I can barely see this. What have been the greatest obstacles? Because you're going to run into things that you can overcome, but you need to know what they were. How do we keep our programs afloat? I don't know how many of you are familiar with the tax law that was just passed, but the tax law recently passed did away with all charitable contributions as a deduction. So if you were getting a lot of your donations or a lot of your funding from local sources, a bunch of them, we don't know how that's going to impact this year, because people, like it or not, make donations because they can write it off. Not everybody's altruistic, so that's going to be something that's going to happen. A question that I was really concerned with was actually one down number I or whatever, F. This is like an eye test.
Yeah.
And the question is, since 3 of the 4 of us up here are what you call owner-operators, like Bruce owns his place, she owns hers, Jeffrey doesn't own his, but he is as close to an owner as you can get. What arrangements have been made for when we age out of the system? I know people don't like to talk about those things, but you have to think about it. Most of you aren't old enough to remember Chicago and the gallery scene in Chicago, but back in the late 70s and 80s and early 90s, it was a vibrant gallery scene that represented ceramics. Almost all those galleries are gone because the owners have either retired or died or quit the business, and as a result, there was no replacement sat in line. And the question I ask is, we have these established programs, we have great things going. When Bruce finally reaches the age that he wants to retire, what happens to Lil Street? Does it keep going? I happen to know that the reason it exists today is because of his energy. When that's gone, what happens? what happens, you know, with the Union Project if funding starts to slowly disappear? How is that going to impact us? The same with Kentucky. You know, even though there's thousands of ceramic students every year being graduated, that doesn't mean they're going to continue on and buy clay. And in my case, you know, I fund my stuff with a trust fund I set up for myself. So I'm okay with that, but I don't know if the private foundations I get money from will still contribute in the future, which can, you know, suddenly is just as quickly as this program came into existence, it can disappear. Unless we make plans accordingly to keep those programs going. So I would like to hear from these guys on what their ideas are about that. And yes.
Have you considered, sorry to interrupt,
No.
have you considered maybe,
Speak really loud so other.
have you considered a manual or anything that is business oriented that could help art centers or future representatives of art centers to help keep it going for future generations?
The question was, have we considered putting together a manual or a publication that would help other people develop their system? I haven't really yet, but that's not certainly something that isn't out of the realm of possibility. I mean, this is just something that came up as a spur of the moment idea that I proposed in SECA, saying, you know, we should be discussing this at some point in time, and they said, okay, you get to do it. You know, thanks. That's what happens when you propose things. And I do think it's important because the arts in the community is you may not think about it because we're all not self-centered so much, but we have to think of ourselves first to keep ourselves alive. But if you don't have a vibrant arts community, you as an artist are going to wither as well. It's just that true. This is a fact. So I'd like to start with the first question of you've got a little bit of information on their history, but how did you guys get started and how did this get going to begin with? Bruce, let's start with you, and then you guys can just discuss among yourselves and to the audience.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So Little Street started in 1975, and I always say it's a 70s business. So we are a for-profit organization, but we run like a not-for-profit. We have artists in residence. We have all kinds of programs that don't really deal with making money, and then we have our classrooms and our gallery that helps support the whole art center. So we started in '75. I had a clay company. I made clay for artists, and just like Link's doing. And I really didn't want to own a business, so I had a bunch of friends who were potters, and 10 of us got together, and I had some friends who had some money, and we bought a piece of real estate on Lil Street. It was an old horse barn built in the 1880s, and we started with 12 artist studios and 1 classroom and the manufacturing facility. And that's how we support ourselves at the beginning. The clay company made the money, and the rest, you know, we helped pay the rent. But there was no thought that the art center would make money. And then I sold the clay company in the '80s, and it just expanded. More artists wanted to rent space. We added classrooms. When we got rid of the clay company, which took like half the building, we then built a bunch of classrooms, and so then we had to make money off that part of the business. And since we don't get any funding, 100% of our income comes from, or it's earned income. So we get money from students and from people who collect pottery and people who rent studios. And it's just grown. I'm not sure why. Friend of mine who does a radio show said, I know your business plan. I know exactly what your business plan was. No business plan. So we sort of organically have grown over the years, and we moved to a new building from a 17,000 square foot building on Little Street to you saw a picture of the Ravenswood building. So now it's 40,000 square feet, and in there we have 25 classrooms. And we have a gallery, we have a shop where we sell artist-made work. We have a not-for-profit organization that rents from us that's really part of us. It's part of our initial mission was to be a place for a different community. So we're looking for artists, for students, for educators, for collectors, and for the general public, and for people who couldn't afford to come to Lil Street. So from the very beginning, we had this program that went to the inner city schools, and we brought people in at a much reduced or a free rate. And so we've grown a lot, but our mission has remained the same. So now we are 43 years old, and I have no idea where we're going to go from here. I mean, I'm not sure. We have no succession plan, but and there are a lot of people who work there who could take over the business, but we have not made any, or I have not made any decision. So, any questions?
I'm not sure this. Oh, it works. Okay. Let's see. Mine is also a for-profit business. It started in 2001 as mostly a teaching studio, and I was making my own pots and selling them, or trying to sell them, and teaching classes. And the classes grew, and there was nowhere in the state of Kentucky to buy ceramic supplies. There was a supplier in Louisville that just sort of decided to close one day, and they weren't run by a potter, and so for 3 or 4 years, everybody in the community was just like, "Oh, where do you go to get your stuff?" And it's like it was like the diaspora. We just, everybody just sort of bought together, and somebody drove, and I kind of thought, well, I've got 30 or 40 students. Maybe I should just start selling some stuff. And it just sort of exploded into, oh my God, everybody needs this. Can you get this? Can you get that? And so it became, much bigger than I had originally planned, which is good and bad. Just planning your growth. That's, if you're ever going to do anything like what we're doing, plan your growth really well, if you can. But anyway, out of the ceramic supplies, that's where really the profit center is. And that's what allows us to do different and new projects. And one of them was starting the clay manufacturing business and the new location. And I do the residency program in Louisville because there's space for it. The place we've been in Lexington for 16 years doesn't really have kind of a private space. It's really kind of run by the students in a lot of ways. And the clay community in Louisville has got a lot longer history. There are a lot more self-supporting potters. It's much more of a city, and so it was also more of a destination. So we could get people from out of state who maybe wanted to move to a city after they graduated to have kind of an art space to continue working in clay. So that's sort of how our residency program got started. But it is funded by basically the business, and let's see, basically business and classes. We don't have a lot of classes in Louisville, and mostly because the space, which is above the store, is dedicated to the residents. And I don't have a succession plan either. I don't have children other than the business itself, and my husband he works at the business, but he's not a potter. I hope to one day sell my business. That's sort of what I've always done, is really reinvested all of the income into growing the business. And didn't want to just sell ceramic supplies. Part of it is that over the years, I supply a lot of the colleges, and so the students come in and would get this, special clay or special tool. And so I've kind of seen people come into a program and see their work, and then I see them graduate, and I get to know people, and I'm like, so what are you going to do after you graduate? And people just get this look. I have no idea. Where am I going to get a gas kiln? Where am I going to get a soda kiln? What am I going to do? Do I want to try to make money on this? And so that was sort of the impetus for me to add the residency program as a new sort of wing of what we're doing, is just to sort of give people who've been my customers, at least locally in the beginning, a place to continue their own pursuit and decide, do they want to find their way in clay to try to support themselves, or do they just want to, continue, have a studio space, We also have people who don't have necessarily clay background. We have an architect who is a resident, and he really does a lot of plaster molds. And so there, we have a lot of people who aren't necessarily specifically clay. A lot of sculptors You know, not so many pots. I love pots. Anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, I think that's sort of. Did I answer everything?
So I already mentioned a little bit about Union Project's origin with with Justin Rawshank. I guess his co-partner in that story was Jessica King, who's currently running for Congress over the eastern side of the state. So two pretty dynamic individuals really having a vision is part of our origin. But I think the other thing that's really important to our story is, especially for those of you who aren't from Pittsburgh, is to know what was happening at the time that Union Project created, because I think it had as much to do with why and how it got created as just two people with a vision. So at the time in Pittsburgh, you probably all know, Pittsburgh was put on the map because of the steel mill and the steel industries and the steel barons, and a lot of money was left behind, but there was a time from like the 50s through the 70s where all these mills started closing, and there was a lot of changing and migration in and out of the city, mostly out of the city, and Pittsburgh started to deteriorate. And so in 2002, when these two people with an incredible vision were standing in front of this beautiful old historic church in ruins, what they were really looking at was a city that was trying to figure out a new identity, losing people in general, but especially young people aged 20 to 30, and also a lot of old historic buildings, especially churches, that were left without congregations anymore. So this kind of multi-layered problem was part of our origin story. The foundation community that was, like I said, left over from a lot of the steel money. There's many, many foundations in Pittsburgh, if you're not aware. I think the second most in the country. So they were looking for active ways and active partners to figure out this retention problem, especially thinking about targeting young people, because we have some of the best universities here. And so, but people would come here and then they would leave. So Jess and Justin, it wasn't just their idea, it was what they represented. They were 20 to 30 somethings. They were passionate individuals. One of them was an artist. You know, they had this vision, and they were able to garner just this tremendous energy from the diverse communities around them, many of whom had become very divided, not unlike what's happening in our country today. You know, Pittsburgh has been a microcosm of that. I'm sure a lot of your cities have gone through this. So this kind of identity crisis moment really presented like the perfect storm of opportunities where foundations were willing to invest, especially when they saw what Jess and Justin were able to do in terms of bringing the community together. I mean, one of the stories that we like to talk about is our stained glass windows. We got an estimate when we purchased the building for $1.3 million to save our windows. We didn't have that money. We were just becoming a nonprofit. In fact, we didn't even purchase the building for ourselves. We had a partner from the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation who believed in their vision so much, purchase it in our name while we became a 501c3. So once we got that, we recognized all the improvements that needed to be made, which were over $1 million without the stained glass windows. We started to think about these obstacles in this moment in time as the greatest opportunity for what Union Project would become, which would be a chance to engage community to solve these kinds of problems. So it took 7 years. We trained hundreds of community members how to rebuild stained glass windows, and they repaired our stained glass windows.
I had a quick question for the audience.
Oh, here.
Yeah. Well, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
How many of you are currently students? How many of you already have your degree and are working artists? About 50-50, roughly. I asked that because I'm skipping down. We're not necessarily going to do these questions in any specific order, but I was looking down at the fact that universities continue to put out students in the liberal arts with degrees in fine arts. And the question is, how do you guys see this shaping up for the future? How do you know, if every year, for instance, in China, in Jingdezhen, they produce. I was at a school there where there's 13,500 students studying ceramics. Now, that's a lot, not necessarily in China's total population, but what's going to happen to all those people? Those are the questions that I keep asking. What do your programs have to offer those students who raised their hands here a few minutes ago in the future or for the future? Anybody can take it.
Yeah, I'll take that. So we, about 10 years ago, can you hear? Hello? Okay. About 10 years ago, we set up an artist in residence program where we have 8 departments, and in each department we invite either 1 or 2 artists. They don't have to have a degree, but we prefer that, to spend a year at Lil Street. They get a studio, they get to teach classes, and they get to kind of spend a year just doing their own work. And it's a good opportunity for people. It's not, you're not in school anymore, but it's a time that you can really build a body of work and think about what you want to do in the future. And so we pay a stipend and we give them, like I said, a studio, but they also can teach classes. And the other thing they can do is take class in any department. So the other day, the ceramic artist in resident was in the textile room sewing. So it's sort of an opportunity to see how other media works, and it's been a pretty successful program. We've had people move on to being self-sufficient artists and to run other programs, and so I think that's one of the ways. Even though we are for-profit, we look at we're all artists. We started, the group that started, we're all artists, and so we are looking at what the best thing for artists is. So that's one way we do it.
At Mudworks, we try to offer, well, as a resident, you have to work for your stipend, a set number of hours a week, 8 hours a week, and it's usually a shift in our store. So you have an 8-hour shift, 9 to 5. You answer the phone, you ring people up, you answer their questions, or you'll work in the lab, or you work in the warehouse helping with the clay production, where you have like a list of cleaning things to do. It's just sort of to see the business side of it, and I spend a lot of time with the residents sort of getting to know what they're wanting to do in the future, not just for their residency. I've done a lot of wholesaling my own work, helping other people learn how to wholesale. I just know a lot of people in the community, and I feel like when a lot of students graduate, they come out with a fine art degree and they've thought about fine art for 4 years or 5 years, but then what do you do with that? And I don't know if the professors are supposed to teach that, or if any of them, I think that most of them that I've talked to are mostly just teaching them about the world of fine art, not necessarily the business of it. And so some people leave wanting to know a lot about the business side, or how can I do this? And I think working in a business helps, especially young people, decide, do I want to get a booth and go to shows? Do I want to, try to become a teacher and a workshop artist? Or, where do I want to go with, with my clay education? And how do I earn money? Because when I was taking art classes, I have a ceramics degree, there was no talk of money. It was, so what is that form? What are you trying to say about that form? Which is wonderful when you're learning, but when you are trying to pay your rent, those two are like the conversation doesn't meet. It didn't for me. So I had a lot of on-the-job training when I graduated. I just sort of am self-taught. I tried basically every way to make money in the arts, and I found my niche, and I just would like to help other people, young people, find their own niche as well.
So again, with Union Project, starting 15 years ago, at the time there really were no programs in clay, post-secondary education, graduate programs, and so that was really an impetus for Justin to want to start a clay studio at Union Project, to be a place that would bring students and folks after college to study together, to make art together, to learn ceramics and share ideas, but also support each other as a community in order for those to want to pursue a career. fast forward 15 years, that's really changed. I mean, you guys are all here now. Hopefully you're seeing some of what's happening in the city. The clay community has really become a community. A couple years ago, we started doing a small neighborhood pottery tour with some of our artists that were graduating to do this work full time. And it attracted a couple hundred people, and that's growing now to over close to 1,000. And that kind of got us this idea of, bringing even a larger regional type of event together. And we have something called the Mother of All Pottery Sales now, which brings over 30 artists from around the region together to sell their work. And collectively, these two sales are selling over $60,000. So a lot has changed in 15 years, but I think our focus continues to evolve too, while we're really trying to support some of what you're saying here, the business side of being an artist, being a ceramist as well, even though we're a nonprofit. We take that really seriously. We are a business with a moral bottom line too, ethical bottom line. So we're really focusing now moving forward on some of the same communities that, again, helped found Union Project. So thinking about marginalized voices, we're focusing right now in our current strategic plan and business plan on especially Black artists, artists from the LGBT community, and we're just, last few years we've been working with artists with disabilities quite a lot. So that's kind of our focus now.
Okay, given the percentages, what % of your funding is from a for-profit and a not-for-profit? In other words, how much, Jeffrey and I were talking yesterday, and he had mentioned the number of grants that he relies upon, which is really huge compared to what we rely on, which is 2, well, 3. So how much impact is the profit versus not-for-profit? Like, is it 60-40, 50-50?
Yeah, so at Union Project, again, we're a nonprofit. We've changed dramatically. I know that you're asking about succession plans and things like that. You talked about our origin. We've already had our first reset. So we were born in 2002. We started several social enterprises to try to earn revenue to sustain ourselves. Most of it didn't work. So in 2009, we hit reset, and we combined some of those and really focused on ceramics and our space rental programs. So with that combination, our budget, which is just over $500,000, consists of about $50% being made from earned revenue. And that's been a goal since that reset. At that time, we were making less than 30% from earned revenue, and relying very heavily on foundations, mainly 1 or 2 big foundations to support us. We realized at that moment that if we continued that way, one foundation pulls out and there is no Union Project anymore. So that was a big wake-up call for us, and that strategic plan was really about diversifying and growing our income. So all the programs I mentioned to you now, the space rental, public and private, all of our ceramics programs, earn us about 50%. We're trying to grow even beyond that. That leaves about 40% now from foundations, but instead of 5 or so foundations, we now are made up of about 24. So that's what we were talking about. It's a lot of work for the money. And that remaining 10 or so % is made up about half from government monies, funds, and then about half from individual donations and corporate giving.
Before Bruce answers, or a follow-up to that would be, what recommendation would you give to members in the audience who are trying to start something? Where would you tell them to go look to get startup funding? If they, I don't know the names of the people in the audience, but let's say that young person right there decided that they wanted to start a cooperative of some kind, how would you recommend, or what would you recommend that they do?
Well, if I knew where the magic pot of money was, I don't know if I would tell you. We're looking too. Like I said, we're working harder now than ever before to make about the same amount of money from 24 foundations as we were when we had 5 or 6. So even here in Pittsburgh, where there's a plethora of foundations who want to support, who have to support many of the causes that our mission supports, it's still very competitive. So what we've just relied on, I guess the best way to answer that, really depends on your environment. It depends on where you are and what the opportunities are, and it's really important to know and seize those opportunities like our founders did. I think for us, earned revenue is a big part of it. So the foundations now allow us to make sure that at least a third of all the programs we run are affordable or free to people who wouldn't be able to afford them otherwise. So that's solid. That's a mandate for us. But the earned revenue, the other thing I should say is the foundation revenue allows us to pilot new programs and build infrastructure. So now when we go to a foundation, it's just like a business going to an investor. We try to make the case that their money investing in our kiln shelter, for example, you know, 1 or 2 big investments in that $500,000 project will allow us to earn and generate revenue long term that will sustain us.
So it's interesting. So Link and I, we started the same way. So I recommend starting a clay manufacturing company. That's
Don't do it.
no, but usually these organizations start out with a group of people that have the same vision, and like the Clay Studio in Philadelphia is very similar to us, and they started out with also with a group of artists, and they decided to go not for profit. And since we didn't do that, I'm not sure how they acquired the foundations and the corporations that help pay a good percentage of the income that they make. But there are organizations out there in Chicago. There's lawyers for the creative arts, and they help you set up what's called a 501c3, which is the Internal Revenue Service number for a not-for-profit. And I'm sure if you're interested, you can always find people that can help you out. Yes?
Hi. We want to provide them with low-cost options, but we'd really like to partner with, organizations that offer grants, foundations for the arts. And so I was wondering if you guys have any experience with that, or if there's any way that you can recommend. We're located in New York, and we're just looking to really create partnerships with arts foundations and organizations, or even grants programs.
Where are you in New York?
Brooklyn.
Oh.
We're called Brooklyn Clay.
Okay. Cool.
I can speak to that from the position of being an educator. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I can speak to that briefly. Being an art educator from Chicago, I worked in areas of Chicago in public schools primarily that were underserved, and funding for materials for the arts was limited. So I became an excellent grant writer. There is an organization in Chicago called Donors Forum, and in Donors Forum, if you research that, you can look for different foundations that are looking to provide support to arts organizations. I'm not sure how that works in New York and other major cities. It might be more difficult, of course, in smaller towns. But being organized about your mission, your values, whatever your plan is, and then writing grants, pursue the opportunities. You have to have someone who's experienced and is a good writer, but it really does pay off. I used to get sometimes as much as $5,000 a year to supplement what my schools gave to me, and with that money I was able to bring into these underserved communities, schools, professional artists who taught a variety of skills. We had drama. We taught teachers how to use video to make films in their classrooms with their students, which was a wonderful activity for kids who were having difficulty with reading and math and were not articulate, but they learned to figure out what they wanted to film and write a script and write a storyboard and learn lighting and learn sound. And it was a whole community of a classroom making these films. So we thought that was a pretty wonderful project. And so, you kind of have to think about it and what specific communities you're trying to reach. and what kinds of activities will help them and support their learning and experiences. But that was my experience.
Have you looked up how to start a 501c3? Have you guys started?
We're a corporate model.
Right.
So we're not going to. Sorry. Hi. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to be a lawyer, and now
Okay.
I'm working in
Okay.
my hobby overtook that.
That's great.
So I'm very familiar with the 501c3 model, but we're a for-profit company that wants to have some elements of the business that are giving based and will give back to the community. So it's really a mixed use opportunity. So that's, I think, part of what makes it difficult is that, we can't really apply for grants and funding that's available for 501c3s. And when we go to corporations, we're really saying, please fund this program specifically. So I think for specific programs, we might go through arts organizations like Fractured Atlas, which would enable us to have a fiscal sponsor that is a 501c3 for a particular program. So that's one thing that we were thinking. I guess I was just wondering if there were any people that had been corporations that
You
had
know
done.
the Textile Arts Center in Brooklyn?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think they're a combination of a for-profit and not-for-profit. And some corporations, if you can give them something in exchange, like their name on a project so that people know that they're doing good work, I think that's what a lot of corporations are looking for now. So that's one way to get some money.
It's also important to remember, and I really was sort of unaware of this too until I started doing this project, is that there are foundations out there, many in your communities, that by law and by obligation have to spend their money each year. I was always approaching these things as begging my little self out there, hoping like the heck they would find the money for me, when in reality, the two private foundations that share the funding for my program, by law, have to get rid of their $10 million every single year. And by the way, the foundations are written. And there's a lot of those out there, and those are people that, in my case, that I have sought, rather than going for any public funding, which comes with its own strings and other things that we hate. I've gone to the private sector, and that's been, for me, sufficient to
You're for-profit,
I'm not for. I'm under an umbrella that's not for profit.
If you also look outside of arts funding, like in Kentucky, there's something called the Kentucky Foundation for Women, and as a woman-owned business, I looked into that to fund some things, but it wasn't really set for me to receive the funding to do a project that really benefited my business, unless it was specifically to outreach people who couldn't afford it. So there may be something that's not necessarily related to the arts, but that's a funding organization specifically potentially for women and minorities in your state that you may want to look at. That even though you are for-profit, a corporate model, if you're doing something that benefits a huge group of people, then they have to give away their money, and they're always looking for really interesting projects. And if it incorporates the arts, then, that might even be more interesting for them.
So one last thing. One of the things we do at Little Street is we have a membership program. We don't tell people they get tax deductions from it, but it's a small enough amount of money, and they get a discount on a class. And we've been able to raise a lot of money through our students, because they feel like they're part of the community, and there's no tax deduction, but if you're paying $50 for a membership, people don't care.
I think another thing too is to realize that when we talk about these kinds of programming, Jeffrey's got a $500,000 budget. Bruce, I don't know, you said the other day, 2-3 million or whatever in that range, something. I don't know what you have. Our total budget, cash outlay, is $30,000, and that's all we spend, to bring in roughly eight or nine visiting resident artists, as well as run all of our other programs. The date nights and things like that don't make us any money. They're just a wash, and I just donate the time, and the money goes to pay for the wine and cheese we give them at the end. But by and large, it's a very, very small amount of capital that has had a lot of impact. And I think when people are thinking about starting these in your own community, they tend to think they need an enormous amount of cash, when in reality, I think what you are saying, what they're saying, about being really specific and really narrowly targeting your ask has helped our cause. I mean, my entire grant applications to the foundations are less than 1 page long. You know, the request is very targeted. The budget is very clear. It takes the officer of that thing to look at it in probably less than 10 minutes to make a decision, yes or no. And you know, I want you to at least keep that in the back of your mind, so when you go back to your communities and you're thinking about trying to collectively do something, it doesn't have to be $1 million thing. It could be very, very low key, or rather low cost, and it'd still be quite impactful.
My advice to anybody who's, especially our residents or other models that are trying to grow, is like what Union Project has done, is diversify. They diversified their donors so that at any point, if one is out, the whole thing doesn't collapse. That's, people often ask me, why do you do so many things at Mudworks? You're insane. And I'm like, well, yes, but at 2008, people don't really think that how that might have impacted my business. But when the housing market went down and property taxes and all that, and they set school budgets 1 or 2 years in advance. 2008, we were like, yeah, we're doing great. 2010, I was like, oh my God. No one had any money. No schools had any budgets. People who had $5,000 had $500. And so, we had to cut staff and do all that. And that really made me think, I need another way to diversify my business. I can't just do 2 things. If I want to grow, I need to do multiple things, and I need to diversify all the income, because at any one point, this is hip and cool, and people are buying this, and then this is hip and cool, and they're doing this, and because I follow market trends, and so that's what I also tell resident artists. It's like you need to diversify in a lot of ways if you want to support yourself in the arts. So either as a not-for-profit or as a for-profit.
What's the name of your organization in Brooklyn?
Brooklyn Clay.
Brooklyn Clay, great.
The other thing I would say is, I know your question specifically was about starting up, and I know that part of our, Union Project's plan was we are trying to build a model that can be replicated. As I mentioned, not just here in Pittsburgh, but beyond. And we do get lots of calls from all over the country about how we've done what we've done. And to the gentleman who mentioned before the manual, you just got me thinking about one of the things that we've been trying to do is work smarter rather than work harder. We've worked really hard, and we've seen people come and go and burn out. And when you're working with community volunteers, which I imagine many of you are, you see them come and go, and it can be harder sometimes to manage volunteers than your own staff. So we wouldn't be on the map without volunteers, so we are very grateful. But in terms of thinking smarter, recently the foundation community in Pittsburgh, I mentioned it's very competitive here. I would not recommend to anyone in Pittsburgh to go out and start a nonprofit. I think there are many. I think that there are many avenues for how folks can partner with nonprofits to still get to their ends, and I think a lot of nonprofits are thinking now and being encouraged to think from foundations about how to partner and collaborate in new, interesting ways. So again, thinking kind of like creatively, we're artists. And so I think when we think of our business model, we're also thinking out of the box. Recently, about 4 years ago, I guess now, we were invited to join something here in Pittsburgh called the Arts Financial Collaborative. This is specifically around this thought of how will we as nonprofit organizations, especially for us, small to medium size organizations, sustain ourselves long term. So we are one of 5 organizations. Contemporary Craft is another one. You may know of them or have been to visit them here in Pittsburgh. And then 3 other organizations that are not necessarily craft. Well, actually the Glass Center, you may have been there too, now that I'm thinking of it. And then a theater company, and the New Hazlitt Theater. So it's 5 of us. We are the smallest by far. Most of the others are over $1 million budgets. Have come together to work on strategies by just started as meeting as executive directors to kind of share ideas, talk about opportunities for funding, where we might share some services. We're non-competitive, so that's part of the equation, and we really respect each other. So that's how we kind of came together. But through those conversations, one of the first strategies that came out of that was to hire a shared chief financial officer. So we now have the benefit 1 day a week of having a very highly skilled financial officer working with us to strategize for the future. And she's helping each of us individually kind of work our way towards the building of a capitalization plan so that we can sustain ourselves long term. And through that activity, we've started to partner in other ways as organizations. You know, our marketing teams now talk. We just got another grant collectively to hire do a tech assessment. So we hired a tech consultant to come in, and now we're going to go back to the foundations with potentially some shared savings and shared investment opportunities to grow our organizations through our technical needs. So we've been doing that through the Allegheny Regional Asset District, which collects percentage of the sales taxes, and a portion of that has to go to the arts. So you may have things like this in your cities that you could look at. But again, as you said, a lot of our funding doesn't even come through the art store. It comes through other, topics that we work with.
Yeah, and I was thinking, and one other thing that you might want to consider, especially those of you leaving, going home, is that many communities like this one I live in have corporations for development in the city, and they own property everywhere, and they are trying to either get it taken over by somebody. There are properties in my community you can buy for $1 if you'll put it to a community use, and I know that one of the biggest problems we all have as artists is basically a place to work. We can only work in our kitchens and our living rooms so long before somebody kicks us out, and you need to find that alternative. Well, you might want to go wherever you live and approach whoever your mayor's development office is and talk to them about properties that you might be able to grab onto if you started a cooperative where 2 or 3 other people went in, and you'd be responsible for certain things, but they would give you the building space for $1. So there are different ways to do it. Before we get to the final questioning, since we're over an hour already, what are the biggest obstacles you three have found in your programming to date, and what do you see as the obstacles in the next 5 years to keeping yourselves going?
For us, I think the cost of everything is
Speak up
just...
a little louder.
Hello? I think the cost of everything has gone up so much. You really need to plan. I mean, we hate to raise prices for classes, but it's your utilities, our real estate taxes, just every expense. I think you've seen that, and so since we are a business, that's been our major problem, is keeping up with hidden inflation, I'd say. So.
Yeah, so I've spoke already about how Union Project was created. I mean, some of our biggest obstacles are the things that we approach with opportunities like artists and think about how can we solve this. So obviously, taking over an old historic church that was pretty much blighted was a major obstacle. And little by little, we've been kind of putting the pieces back together and saving this beautiful church for the community. But there are other obstacles that are pretty significant for us. I mentioned I know I'm speaking a lot about the foundation community. As we've been trying to build our infrastructure, because we're a nonprofit, I think people often have the mentality of, oh, we'll give you our old stuff and you'll like it because you're a nonprofit and you'll get it for free. We don't really think of ourselves that way. We kind of say, we want to be somewhere between like your grandma's house and like a Mac store. We're a little more sophisticated than that. In fact, we just sat down with a consultant recently who was saying like, okay, you sure you want to look at a budget, and like we're going to talk about the numbers now. And we said, can we talk to you for like 20 minutes? And at the end, he's like, okay, now I see we can start somewhere else. So like changing that mentality, just that obstacle, it still happens with foundations. For many years, we were just seen as this small, good for the community organization, and we're trying to show them that we are a regional serving asset. We're becoming nationally known for what we do. We're in a field, in a sector, even though the arts have been transforming people's lives for centuries. This is kind of an emerging sector. Arts is social change, and so having to prove ourselves, as you said, being a good grant writer. We have to know our audience, and every time we write grants, for example, there's a foundation in town that had given us money to level our floor. Our floor was the original raked floor, and said, okay, you know, after this you can come back in a year. So we did it. It was successful. We grew our space rental by 40%, 45% within that year. Went back and they said, well, you know, the foundation head has kind of changed their mind. They're not really interested in infrastructure like that anymore. What are you doing in technology? So like, we had to be prepared, and it took 4 years of asking and asking, and finally we sent them a letter showing the budget improvements and the growth from that improvement. By 4 years, it had paid for itself. Basically, we showed them the ROI and said, we think we're ready for another grant. And they said, okay. Had to be in technology, and luckily we had a technology plan that we had been working on and took it to them. And again, it took several years before they got their own CRM system, and they went, oh, okay, now we see the benefits of this. Okay, we'll fund you. So those kinds of things are obstacles just to moving our strategic plans forward. But again, we're trying to think smart and meet each challenge with creativity.
I would say for Mudworks, obviously the cost of things is, I guess, I would say in the last year, really gone up quite a lot. But for the residency program, for me, it's the young people that come in, they commit to a certain number of hours, which is 8 hours a week, and they're like, oh, I can do that. And like 3 months in, they're losing their minds because they're burned out and because they've just graduated, and now they have to find a 40 or 60 hour a week job to pay their bills, and then have time for the studio, and then have time to work their hours to earn their stipend, you know, and then find the creativity. So for me, the challenge is finding, keeping people motivated, trying to find good young people who are a little more realistic, you know, about what they can actually accomplish in, you know, a 6 to 9 month residency. So that the program can grow and be interesting. Because if it doesn't produce interesting work and sort of some noise on social media, it doesn't excite other young people to try to come and do it. And so no matter what funding I might have, if I don't have people apply, I don't have a residency program. So sort of, if I create the funding, but they don't create the synergy in a way, because I'm busy running the business, you know, then it won't grow. Does that make sense? You know, it's kind of a strange program in that way.
Can I speak to that too real quick too?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's reminding me. So I mentioned in 2009 when we had hit reset at Union Project, our ceramics co-op memberships at the time was a pretty loosely based, not very much paying group of artists who were enjoying being in the studio and using it to produce their work. But in 2009, we got in such financial, you know, dire straits, we had to really rethink that. And so the solution with that obstacle was to basically talk to the artists themselves. I mean, we found out that most of them had incredible experiences teaching all different, you know, ability levels, a lot of the diverse communities that we serve, people with disabilities, elderly, that type of thing. So we just asked them if we could try a new model, expanding, you know, by having them teach classes. And because we as an organization were cash poor, and they didn't necessarily have a lot more money to give us, we kind of we evolved our co-op membership fee structure. So basically they were all paying us something, and they had to give us the 3 hours of studio time a month to just maintain the co-op, because it's a true collective co-op in the way that it functions. But then beyond that, they could work additional time to reduce their monthly fees. And so they would give additional hours to helping us teach classes, run programs, build curriculum. But I think the key is that it's never a one-size-fits-all. Union Project has continued to evolve, and I'm sure you guys have found that too. Like, that started to work really well for us for several years, and we found at the same time we were growing our classes and our program schedule, and I mean growing. Like, we taught like 8 a year for adults, and now we teach 70, and for a while we were teaching more than that. So at the same time, we had a couple of loosely affiliated members. You know, we grew our co-op to 25, which was totally full. So at this last strategic plan, 2015, 2016, we really had to kind of right-size that and make sure our artists weren't burning out because now they didn't have time to make their own work. And so we really had to kind of pull back, look at opportunities to expand, and also pay the artists who were going above and beyond and even going off-site for us. So we hired an arts educator, and that was really kind of the reorganization process for us. So it's just a continual evolve.
How do you, the three of you, find your resident artists? I mean,
We love them.
no. How do you find? Yeah.
Oh, I thought
How do you locate? Do you have an application that you have them solicit? I mean, if any of the people in the audience wanted to work at Union, like how would they?
Yeah. So we have an application process. One of our staff people, actually 3 of our staff are in the audience. Jackie's raising her hand. You could talk to her.
So that's how we got an audience. You forced them to be here.
No, they came to support me all on their own. So yeah, our artists in residence program is about a year. I think we were talking about this. There's a lot of similarities. The stipend's pretty similar. We have an application online. People can call us and inquire. We are, as I mentioned, really focused right now on with our visiting artists and our artists in residence, also on bringing artists of color. So we started with David McDonald. He was here yesterday giving a talk. I don't know if anyone knows him. We brought him in as a visiting artist. And since that, we've brought in 7 or 8. We're now working with 7 or 8 different artists of color. So that really helped us grow. And they have all brought networks as well. In fact, the one panel I was in yesterday, I think it was Jim McDowell, was kind enough to share 2.5 pages of black artists that are looking to do that type of work. So just talk with us. We'd love to talk with you about our space.
Yeah, we also advertise online and in magazines like Ceramics Monthly and Metalsmith, Snag, and word of mouth. Last year we had about 120 people apply for the 8 spaces. So yeah. But it's tough. Like in Chicago, housing is very expensive, and we're just giving a small stipend. So people do get burned out if they have to work too much. It's hard. So we try and make it clear to them that they need to be realistic about what they can do. So
We advertise online as well. You can go to our website to apply, submit images, and like a letter of intent. And we let people choose the length of their residency. So it could be 6 months, 9 months, a year. And at a year, if they want to re-up for another year, like if they're doing some really interesting, cool stuff, or they really fit in well at Mudworks, and then they can stay for another year. We do advertise online. We do Instagram and things like that bring, but mostly a lot of our residents and customers, will tell so-and-so, we have a residency program. I have a couple friends, and we send out emails and things. So.
Yeah, and I think we've just recently gone online. One of my last residents that I had of the last residency period, I found to be so extremely organized and wonderful that I hired her. I found some extra money in my back pocket, and so she works part-time and gets the studio full-time and is just a whiz with organization, which is something I desperately need. And we do it online. We do it word of mouth. We do it on Facebook. We do it on wherever she's put us. I do it an awful lot when I travel internationally to do my own residencies overseas. I recruit people there because I do want to keep it somewhat international. I didn't have to apply when I was your resident, did I?
yeah, I don't know how you got in.
Yeah, I was Bruce's first resident artist back in 1985. I think we just talked our way into it back in the old days. Are there any questions? Because we're coming to the end of things, and I'd like to just anything that we could, questions you have specifically that we could answer.
She's got one.
Yeah. We can't hear you. You need a mic.
For each of your organizations, since you all have artists in residence programs, could you tell us what the dates are? Like, is it August to August, or I know yours is flexible, and when are applications due for the next year, so that if anybody's interested, they can know when to contact you?
Good idea. So our artist residency programs are from end of August for a year, and the application is due May 1st this year. So if you're interested, lilstreet.com.
Jeffrey?
I have to check. Jackie, when does ours due? When does our residence start? When does it start?
July 1st, I believe. June or July.
And applications are due?
Shortly.
Soon?
It's not live yet.
Okay, thanks.
Ours is usually in the fall. If we have room for 3, and if someone leaves, we usually know months ahead and we'll advertise it. But actually our location in Louisville we rent, and our lease is up in April of next year. So we are going to start looking for a much bigger location. So I may or may not open up in this fall, because I don't know where we'll be and what it'll be like. So I don't want to sign people on and have someone move to town. But generally it's in the fall, because in the early fall is when the resident artist show is in our gallery, and that's usually the end of people's residencies. So.
Yeah, in our case, we've had pretty flexible application period. It's usually whatever somebody sent me something in the mail. Mitzi's got me a little bit more onto a schedule. I think by the end of May, we're looking to try to get the slots filled for the next time. We do them from September 1st through May. That way, we usually take 2 weeks, 3 weeks in May to just kind of let the studio rest. I know it sounds silly, but there are times that you just need to not have anything going on in there, that you need to just let that cat wander around and occasionally clean stuff and repair stuff. And then that's summertime is when we get into the things with children. We're doing things where I'm offering teachers coursework that'll help them teach art better, because in Indiana you do not have to have an art degree to teach elementary or middle school students anymore. You can be anybody that has an interest in it, which we know how that works with science, and that doesn't. So we're trying to offer that to them. So that's pretty much where we still try to remain flexible, because every now and then somebody will come up and they have a month open. Since our residencies run from 1 month minimum to 6 months or longer if I can work it out. We want to remain a little flexible. I think this year we had Vlad, James, Donna. We've had 6 or 7 this year that range from a 1 month shorty to 2 months to 6 months for Jim Webb, 6 months for Sydney. So it varies, and we like it that way because it keeps the studio a little fresher. You've got somebody new coming in that's going to work pretty intensely for 1 month, and that energy then feeds into the person who's already been there a while but has settled in, and they get recharged. And of course, our studios are open to the public at all times. It's one of the requirements that we have, is that you don't have to speak to the audience all the time, but we expect you to be cordial to people visiting, because those might be the people that are going to buy your work in the future. Any other questions about anything? Who's going to win the basketball tournament? Who cares about the basketball tournament? Okay.
Bruce, you mentioned the idea of this fee that you have. And
Greg, hold on.
Okay, sorry. You mentioned this fee that you have for membership at the Art Center. And I was just curious if, and this kind of goes back to the Brooklyn constituent over there, in regards to developing guilds and the ideas of having a semi-autonomous, I know that's kind of an oxymoron, but a semi-autonomous guild that works in parallel with the Art Center, so that they help subsidize some of the operational cost, or help subsidize some of the visiting artists that may come in. And I'm just curious if that's something that develops at your institute, or any of you, if you have any kind of guild that helps offset some of the cost, so that you can develop and generate a program that can continue with a nonprofit side by side with the idea of being for profit at the same time.
So I guess the closest to a guild is our studio members who pay rent, who support part of our programming. But the membership, the way we work it out is if you pay, it's like $40 a year, and you get a discount. If you take 4 classes during the year, you break even. But we found people just want to have a membership. Yeah, it's unusual, but they want to be, and Little Street is a community. It's a community-based arts center, and people like the idea of being part of the community. And we do a membership show once a year so they can be in the show. That's it.
If I may, I'm sorry. To follow up, what we do at Walnut Creek Clay Arts Studio is we have a guild, and the guild has been established for a very long time, decades. And what they do is they pay a fee, and that fee gives them discounts on certain classes, like Master Potter series, where we invite artists to come and do demos, one-day lectures and demos. And then also we have what's called an open studio, which is typically around, we're in California, so we're right outside of San Francisco, so it's a little expensive. And you're looking at about $160 for this open studio class. And if you're a member, then it's only about $85, $90. And then they pay these fees and they get these discounts to be part of this guild, and then that allows them to have sales. And then whenever they have 3 sales a year, a percentage, like 25, 30% of that, goes back into the Clay Arts Guild, and then those monies are used towards operational cost for our studio, as well as bringing in master potters. So though the Walnut Creek Clay Arts Studio is funded by the city, it is a municipal arts center, and it is funded by the government, it does at the same time have a nonprofit that works alongside to help us work in times when we're in recession or at a time of monetary disarray, so to speak. And then we rely on them, and they allow us to continue our programming, though we may not have as much for-profit funding coming from the city itself.
So how much does it cost to join the guild? Is it a monthly fee?
It's a prorated. So like, let's say the fiscal system for membership starts in fall and then goes all the way until summer.
Right.
And if you start in the fall, it's like $80 for the year, the membership fee, and then that gets you the discount every quarter. We work on quarters, not semesters. And every quarter, you get a percentage off of these classes. So by the time you're taking classes for 2 quarters, you've already made your money, right, for the membership fee. And then let's say you're new and you've just retired and you're a baby boomer, right? And you've just retired and you want to start taking ceramics classes, and it's springtime. We're 3 quarters into the fiscal year, and it's springtime. It's prorated down, like $10 off every new quarter. So you don't have to pay the full amount, but you still get the discounts for spring and summer, and then fall starts, and then you renew your membership, and then that gets you all the discounts for open studio, as well as some classes and specialty visiting artist classes as well.
It's very, very similar to our membership program.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anything? Well, thank you for listening to us, and I hope a little bit of something